My name is Harold Jameson. I'm 81 years old, a retired rail worker, widowed for 7 years now, and I live alone on a fading patch of land in northern Montana that once thrived with chickens, vegetables, and a wife's laughter. The winters are long here, and so are the silences. I never used to mind silence. In fact, I used to cherish it. After 37 years working around roaring diesel engines and clanging couplers, silence was a kind of reward. But that was before silence started sounding like absence, and absence started feeling like death's rehearsal. My wife, Edith, passed away in her sleep during an unremarkable February night, when the house was so still I could hear the expansion of the wood beams under the roof. They told me later it had been an aneurysm, fast and painless. But I've replayed that night hundreds of times since, wondering if I should have noticed something, done something, anything to change the outcome. We'd been married nearly 52 years. She made quilts, peach cobbler, and a home so gentle that even the cows grazing behind our fence looked more peaceful than elsewhere. After she died, I let the garden go fallow and gave away the goats. I kept the hens, but not for the eggs. They were just something breathing in the yard. I kept driving, though. My old 1994 Silverado, two-tone maroon and cream, with the cracked leather seat and rusted tailpipe, became more than just a vehicle. It was my routine, my last tether to motion, and frankly my last real possession of meaning. I drove into town every Tuesday and Friday, parked by the hardware store, got coffee at Earl's, read the paper, then drove the long, slow way home down the gravel road, past the Douglas Pines and a rusted-out bus that hasn't moved since Clinton was in office. That truck had been with me through everything: camping trips with Edith, hauling lumber for the house rebuild after the storm in '98, driving to the hospital when our daughter Clara was in labor. It's not just a truck. It's my damn life on 4 wheels. Clara died young, breast cancer, aggressive and unfair. She left behind a boy, Colby, barely 2 at the time, and a mess of grief that I never quite processed. Edith took on the bulk of raising Colby in those early years, while his father, a shallow man named Brett, disappeared into God knows where. Colby was our whole world after that, our second chance at meaning. We poured everything into him. Edith sewed him jackets from old denim. I built him a treehouse that was far too dangerous by today's standards. We made it work. He was smart and sharp, and always asking questions. But time, as it does, had other plans. After Edith passed, Colby didn't come around as much. He had gone off to college, business school somewhere in Oregon, and though he called sometimes, the calls became shorter, more transactional. Still, I kept telling myself he was busy, building his life, doing what young men are supposed to do. That's what Edith would have said. "Don't cling too tight, Harold," she would whisper when I stared too long at the phone. "He's got to make his own way." But I wasn't clinging. I just didn't want to vanish before someone noticed I was fading. 2 months ago, Colby called out of the blue, said his apartment lease had ended, he'd had a falling out with a friend, and he needed a place to lay low and recharge before figuring out his next steps. I didn't hesitate. "Of course, come home," I told him. "The spare room's clean, your old dresser's still there, and I'll even dig out the Sega Genesis you used to love." He showed up 2 days later with 2 duffel bags and a 1,000-yard stare. He looked different, bigger, broader, a man now, but with a kind of looseness in the eyes, a flicker of impatience I hadn't seen before. He hugged me like it was a formality, not a connection. He didn't mention Edith or Clara. He commented on the smell of the house, asked if there was Wi-Fi, then vanished into his phone for the rest of the night. I didn't press. I was just glad he was under my roof. The first week passed quietly. He mostly slept in, emerged around noon, microwaved something, and retreated again. I didn't mind. I was used to solitude. Occasionally we'd talk over dinner, meatloaf, pot pie, simple food. But the conversations were shallow. "How was your day, Grandpa?" he'd ask without looking up. "Same as yesterday," I'd reply, trying to sound cheerful. He never asked about the ranch, or Edith, or the stories I used to tell when he was a boy, about hobo towns along the railroads, or the blizzard of '73 when I had to sleep in a switching yard caboose. Instead, he talked about crypto, drop shipping, and NFTs as if these were gospel. It was like trying to explain rainfall to a fish. He was submerged in a world I had no map for. Still, I didn't complain. He was family, and family sticks. Then came the moment that began it all. It was a Sunday. I remember because the church bells were ringing from across the valley, though I hadn't been to church since Edith's funeral. I was finishing up feeding the hens when Colby came striding out the front door in a leather jacket he hadn't worn all week. His hair was slicked, his jeans were tight, and he had a clipboard under his arm. I noticed another man standing by the gate, hands in pockets, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. Colby had that look, confident, resolved, but with a thin layer of defensiveness, like he knew he was about to push me somewhere I didn't want to go. "Hey, Pops," he said, using a term he'd never used before. "We're selling your truck today. Buddy over there's offering cash. I figured it's time." He smiled like he expected applause. I just stood there, frozen. The feed scoop halfway to the coop. Chickens pecking unconcerned at my boots. "Excuse me," I asked, genuinely unsure I'd heard him right. "The Chevy, your old truck. It's a collector's item now, did you know that? Guy's offering $3,000, sight unseen. We should take it before it rusts away. I mean, come on, you can't even drive it safely anymore, right?" My mouth went dry. Not because of the truck itself, though that alone would have been enough, but because of the tone. The assumption. The sheer ease with which he had decided that something deeply mine was now up for negotiation. That's when I realized the house wasn't as full as I'd hoped. It was just occupied. He hadn't come home. He'd come for the spoils. I didn't answer Colby right away. My grip tightened on the metal scoop, as if the weight of the cracked corn in it could somehow steady me. I looked at the man leaning on the gate. Young, mid-30s maybe, with a muscle-cut beard and a trucker cap worn backwards. He didn't look at me. He was busy examining the Chevy, hands running along the hood like he was already measuring his prize. Something old in me stirred. Something from the railroad days, when you had to stand your ground or get shoved off the platform. I set the scoop down gently by the coop and walked over to my truck, slow and deliberate, my boots crunching on the gravel with every step. I put my hand on the hood, palm flat on the warm steel, and looked at Colby like I was seeing him for the first time. "You think this is junk?" I asked. He shrugged. "Not junk, just outdated. You barely drive anymore, Grandpa. Come on, don't be stubborn. You've got 2 tractors, and you never go anywhere further than the post office." I said nothing. He took my silence as a cue to push further. "Look, it's a good offer. $3,000 cash. I already checked. Blue Book says it's more than fair for a vehicle this age. I even pre-filled the title transfer form. All we need is your signature. And don't worry about the DMV. I'll take care of all the paperwork for you." He pulled the clipboard out like it was a school presentation, flipping to the form in question with a practiced finger. I looked at it, and then at him. My hands were steady, but inside I felt something tipping, an old anger mixed with humiliation. He hadn't asked. Not once. He hadn't sat down and said, "Grandpa, I think it's time." Or, "What do you think about parting with the truck?" Number. He'd assumed, decided, and executed like I was a senile codger incapable of making my own choices. The man by the gate finally spoke. "Looks real clean, sir. Not many of these left in this shape. Original mileage?" His voice was friendly enough, but there was something oily beneath it. I didn't answer him. I turned back to Colby. Did you think I wouldn't notice? That you'd just roll it away while I was feeding the hens? He frowned. I was trying to help. You don't need it. You could use the cash. And frankly, you shouldn't be behind the wheel anymore, not at your age. Be reasonable. I felt my stomach clench, not because of his words, but because I'd heard them before. Doctors, neighbors, even Edith towards the end, softly suggesting I let go of the wheel. But none of them had tried to sell what I wasn't ready to lose. I rebuilt the carburetor with your mother in '95. I said, my voice low. We drove this truck up to Glacier the year before Clara died. You threw up licorice in the back seat. Edith made you drink warm ginger ale from a thermos. Do you remember that? He blinked, caught off guard by the memory. No, I don't. Of course he didn't. That trip had been 22 years ago. To him it was a ghost, but to me it was vivid. I could still feel Edith's hand on my shoulder, still hear her humming along to Johnny Cash on the radio. The truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was a vessel, my last physical link to the things that had mattered. Colby took a step closer. You're getting emotional. I get it, but it's just a truck. Come on, sign the form. It's not like we're putting you in a home or something. He laughed at his own joke, but I didn't. My heart thudded in my chest, heavy as an anvil. The man by the gate started walking over. Sir, I got the cash on me, he said, patting his side. $3 grand, just like the boy said. Easy deal. 5 minutes and I'll be out of your hair. I looked at his car. An ugly lime-green Charger, modified, loud, soulless. I imagined my Chevy chained behind it like a dying animal being dragged to slaughter. That image shook something loose in me. I took a deep breath, stepped back from the hood, and turned toward the house. Get off my property, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The man laughed, thinking I was joking. Colby didn't. Grandpa, stop being dramatic. I turned to him. Number, you stop. You come into my home, eat my food, sleep under my roof, and now you try to sell my truck behind my back? Are you that hungry for pocket money? His jaw tightened. It's not about the money. It's about safety. About being practical. I was trying to help you, whether you realize it or not. No, I said. You were trying to help yourself. That's the difference. He stood there, arms crossed, looking like a child who's been denied candy. You're overreacting. You always do. It's just a truck. I nodded slowly. And you're just a guest. One more outburst like this and you'll be packing those duffel bags again. The man with the money started backing up. Hey, I don't want no trouble. I thought this was all above board. It's not, I said. It's theft, if you take one step with that truck. The man turned and left without another word, leaving a faint smell of cologne and motor oil behind him. Colby stood frozen, eyes narrowing. You're making a mistake, he said. You're pushing me away. I walked past him toward the coupe. You did that yourself. I didn't speak to him for the rest of the day. He slammed a few cabinets, made noise like a caged bear, then disappeared into the basement for hours. I didn't ask what he was doing down there. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept looking out the window, half expecting him to sneak out and hot-wire the truck. But it stayed parked, loyal and unmoved, beneath the stars. It wasn't just a confrontation. It was a fracture. One that had probably begun long ago, unnoticed, and now had split wide enough to show daylight through it. I made coffee at 3 a.m. and sat at the kitchen table, wondering where this all was headed. I didn't yet know that the truck was only the beginning, that Colby's plans were deeper, darker, and far more calculated than I dared imagine. The next morning began with silence, so thick and deliberate it seemed rehearsed. I woke before dawn, as I always did, brewed a pot of coffee that smelled more bitter than usual, and sat at the table listening for movement upstairs. Nothing. No creaking floorboards, no slammed doors, no familiar shuffle of Colby's socked feet descending the stairs like he was too heavy for the wood. I almost convinced myself he had left in the night, but his duffel bags were still by the couch, his sneakers tossed near the baseboard, one laces tied, the other not. I walked out to the porch, the air sharp with morning cold, and there was the Chevy, unmoved, the dew still glistening on the hood like a quiet badge of survival. I sipped my coffee, my thoughts already circling. The boy hadn't apologized. Not a note, not a grunt of regret. Just silence, the kind you learn not to trust. When he finally emerged around 10, yawning like he'd just completed a full shift underground, he avoided eye contact. "Morning," he muttered, heading straight to the fridge. I nodded, said nothing, watching him pull out the milk, sniff it and grimace. "We're out of cereal," he added, like that was some emergency I had created. I told him there was toast, eggs, flour, even bacon in the freezer, but he waved me off like I'd offered him dirt. "Nah, I'll just go into town later, grab something, maybe Starbucks." I said nothing. He poured himself a glass of orange juice, took one sip, then set it down, abandoning it half full on the counter before retreating to the living room with his phone. That glass stayed there until afternoon. Later that day, while stacking firewood along the shed wall, I noticed the garage door was open. I rarely leave it open more than a few minutes. Old habit. When I stepped inside, the sight stopped me mid-stride. My toolbox, the red Craftsman set I'd had for over 40 years, was missing. Not misplaced, not shifted. Gone. I looked around, checked the shelves, the workbench, even the pegboard where my hammers and wrenches hung. A few hooks were empty. The cordless drill was gone too, and so was the crate of spare alternator parts I'd salvaged over the years. Panic didn't come immediately. What came first was insult, a creeping sense of being trespassed upon in my own sanctuary. I went inside, hands still dusty from the firewood, and found Colby on the porch, scrolling his phone. "Where's my toolbox?" I asked directly. He looked up, innocent. "Which one?" "The red Craftsman, the one with the socket set, and the drill, and the spare parts." His eyes flicked away for a moment, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. "Oh, that. I sold it," he said flatly. "What?" My voice rose without my permission. "To who?" "Guy in town. I put it up online a couple weeks ago. Said he was restoring an El Camino. Paid cash." "You did what?" "Grandpa, come on. You never use that stuff. You haven't fixed anything bigger than a chicken fence in years. Half that junk was rusted." I figured. "You figured wrong." I stepped forward. "You had no right to touch a damn thing in my garage, let alone sell it. That toolbox was older than you. It was mine." He rolled his eyes. "You're overreacting again. It was just tools. You don't even know what's in half those drawers." "I know what's missing," I snapped. "And I know when a man's legacy is being picked apart, piece by piece." He stood abruptly, as if ready to escalate further. "Why are you so attached to crap, Grandpa? It's just stuff. You live like it's still 1982. The truck, the tools, the damn wallpaper in the bathroom. It's like you're afraid to throw anything out." "Because I built this life," I said. "I put in every nail, every beam, every fence post. That garage isn't junk. It's a history of doing things with my hands. You weren't here. You didn't see what it took." "Well, maybe that's your problem," he said sharply. "You cling to things instead of people. You talk more to that damn truck than you ever did to Mom." That hit like a slap. He had no right to say her name that way, no right to weaponize her absence. My hands trembled. "Don't you dare pretend to know what I felt for Clara," I said, my voice shaking. "She was my daughter, your mother. You don't get to rewrite that just because you're angry. I won't let you pawn off my life piece by piece." He turned away, muttering something under his breath. I couldn't catch it, but I didn't need to. The wall had cracked. What followed in the days after was an unraveling. He stopped pretending to be courteous. He left dirty dishes in the sink, started using my credit card for takeout and gas without asking. Said he assumed I wouldn't mind. I cancelled the card, and he acted like I'd robbed him. One afternoon I caught him on the phone in the yard, pacing in fast circles, saying things like, "He's practically senile, and once I get access it'll be fine." When I asked who he was talking to, he claimed it was a recruiter for a sales job in Boise. I didn't believe a word of it. The house felt poisoned. I started locking the door to the garage, then the door to my bedroom. My sleep became light and fitful. I stopped leaving him alone with the mail. Something told me he was looking for more than just loose change or leftovers. He was searching for keys, for documents, for anything that could be turned into leverage. The final straw came on a Thursday. I was out back raking dead leaves when I heard an engine turn over that wasn't the mower. I walked around the house and saw my truck rolling slowly down the driveway, Colby behind the wheel. I sprinted, not ran, sprinted, and stood in front of it, hands raised. He slammed on the brakes, window down, expression smug. "Just taking it for a spin," he said. "No big deal." Without asking. I didn't think I needed to ask for a test drive. It's not a toy. It's not for sale. It's not yours. It's sitting there rotting. He snapped. "You won't even change the oil. I checked. That thing hasn't had a proper tune-up in years. And yet it still runs better than anything you'll ever understand." I climbed into the passenger side, reached across, and turned the ignition off myself. He exhaled loudly, frustrated, like I was the one being irrational. I took the keys, tucked them into my chest pocket, and got out. "Enough, Colby. You're here as my guest, but you're acting like a squatter with a clipboard. You want to stay under my roof? You start treating it, and me, with respect. Otherwise you can leave. Today." He stared at me for a long time. I couldn't read his eyes anymore. Whatever was in there wasn't grief, wasn't guilt. It was something colder, something that looked like calculation. "We'll talk later," he said. "I've got things to do." He walked inside, leaving the truck idling. I sat there, in the cab, door open, heart pounding, and for the first time in years I felt something like fear, not of violence but of being cornered, of being outmaneuvered by someone I had once held in my arms while he wept over a scraped knee. My grandson was becoming a stranger, and my home no longer felt safe. It was just after noon when I found the envelope. I'd come back from the feed store, alone, as usual now, and noticed the desk drawer in the back room had been left open a crack. It was one of those details you don't miss when you've spent your life in the same house, where every creak and shadow is part of your mental map. That drawer was always shut tight. I kept the important things there. I opened it, and inside, pushed beneath an old birth certificate and Edith's last insurance bill, was an empty envelope that had once contained the title to the truck. My name wasn't on it anymore. I froze, my fingers pinching the flap, heart thudding in my ears. I kept that title in that drawer for 30 years. No one touched it but me. No one even knew where I stored it except Edith. And now, apparently, Colby. I looked around, hands moving faster now, searching through the folders, under the stacked papers, even down the back of the drawer. Nothing. It was gone. For a moment my knees buckled, and I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from falling. That's when I saw the slip of receipt paper tucked beneath the edge of the blotter, a printout from some car appraisal website. I pulled it out. 1994 Chevrolet Silverado 1500, classic collector model. Restored condition resale estimate, $14,700. Next to the figure, Colby had scribbled something in pen. Minimum $9,000. If he resists, start low. 3K bait. There were more numbers below, calculations, rough guesses, including a note in brackets. Split were Travis or pocket difference. My head swam. Travis must have been the man from the gate. And bait wasn't a joke. It was a strategy. He'd been planning it all. All of it. The fake test drive, the pre-filled form, the valuation hidden from me. My own grandson was trying to hustle me like some half-senile antique dealer. I stood there staring at that paper, that ugly scrawl in his handwriting, looping, careless, rushed like someone who assumes the world owes them something. And a heat bloomed in my chest. Not rage. Not yet. Just the deepest kind of sorrow that settles like concrete behind your ribs. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft of memory, of meaning, of dignity. When Colby returned that evening, I confronted him. I didn't raise my voice. I laid the appraisal on the kitchen table, slid it across without a word. He stared at it, then gave the most infuriating shrug I'd ever seen. "You went through my stuff?" he said, as if I'd violated him. I didn't answer. I just waited. He sighed, exasperated. "Okay, fine. Yes, I looked at the title. I was thinking about options. You're not using the truck, Grandpa. I didn't think you'd freak out over a damn paper." "You forged my name on a form," I said quietly. "I found it in the printer. You printed a bill of sale with my signature already on it." "It's just a placeholder," he said. "Not legal. You didn't sign anything. I didn't file anything. You're making this a bigger deal than it is." "You lied," I said. "You stole from me." "I didn't steal anything," he snapped. "God, you're impossible. Do you even know how much that truck is worth? You're sitting on money that could be useful. You could fix up this place, hire help, replace those busted stairs, maybe even upgrade your damn mattress. And that would matter to you if you planned on staying," I said. "But you don't. You never did. You came here to scavenge." He laughed then, sharp and bitter. "Oh, come on, spare me the morality play. This house is falling apart. You live like a recluse. I'm the only one in the family who still talks to you. Everyone else moved on. Maybe it's time you did too." I didn't respond. What could I say? The boy I'd rocked to sleep during thunderstorms now saw me as a transaction. He left again that night, stormed out muttering something about going to stay with friends. I didn't stop him. I just sat there at the table for what felt like hours, staring at that appraisal sheet like it was an autopsy report for something long dead. And still, even after all that, some part of me hoped he'd come back remorseful, that maybe this was just youthful arrogance, not malice. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't immaturity. This was intent. He wasn't confused. He wasn't misguided. He was methodical. He'd calculated the value of my life's pieces and had started selling off whatever he could get away with. And I knew then, as the wind picked up outside and the lights flickered with another Montana brownout, that I had to do something more than hide the keys or lock the garage. I had to act, because the next time it wouldn't be just the truck. It would be the house, or the land, or my name. And if I let it go, there'd be nothing left of me but a dusty photo in someone else's attic. 2 days passed without a sign of Colby. I didn't call him. I didn't ask where he went or if he was coming back. I spent those days in an uneasy silence, the kind that settles not from peace, but from anticipation, like the stillness before a storm. I went about my routines like a man preparing for siege. I changed the locks on the garage and the front door. I moved all important documents, birth certificates, property deeds, insurance records. into a fireproof box I stored behind a false panel in the pantry, a trick I'd learned long ago during my time working the rails with men who hid valuables in hollowed-out floorboards and coal bins. I took the truck and parked it behind the old tool shed, chaining the wheels and covering it with a thick green tarp. It wasn't that I expected Colby to come back with bolt cutters, but I didn't rule it out either. Something in his eyes that last night had changed. It wasn't disappointment or frustration. It was calculation, that hollow focus you see in men who've already made a decision and are just waiting for the right moment to act on it. I started keeping my phone on me at all times, even in the bathroom, and turned off voicemail. I had this gnawing feeling that he'd try to leave messages I couldn't trace, or twist my words into some excuse for further trespass. Still, the house felt heavier with each passing day. Edith's portrait on the mantel seemed to watch me with a gaze I couldn't quite decipher. Accusation, perhaps, or maybe just sorrow. It was on the third morning that I found the letter. Not in the mailbox, not on the porch. No, Colby had slipped it under the front door in the night, like a coward avoiding confrontation. I opened it with a pocket knife, careful not to tear the paper. The handwriting was his, rushed and angular. "Grandpa, look, I know you're angry, I get it. But you need to understand that you're not thinking clearly anymore. You've been forgetting things. You've been paranoid. This isn't me attacking you. It's me trying to help. I talked to someone about getting you evaluated. There are programs that protect people in your situation. You need assistance, whether you want to admit it or not. I'm not going to stand by while you spiral. I've made some calls. There's going to be a social worker coming by to check on you. Please cooperate. It's for your own good. I still love you. Colby." I read it twice. The first time, I felt the blood drain from my face. The second time, I felt it surge back in a hot rush of fury that made my fingertips tremble. This wasn't just about a truck anymore. This was about control, about erasure. He wanted to have me declared mentally unfit, to label me senile, to take legal power over my property, my accounts, my life. The letter wasn't concern. It was a declaration of war dressed in the language of compassion. He wasn't coming to steal anymore. He was coming to replace me. I sat at the table, the letter open beside my coffee, and tried to steady my breathing. A social worker. An evaluation. I knew what those meant. Colby must have started laying the groundwork already. Probably told them I was delusional, unstable, forgetting names and misplacing keys. I could see the playbook now, each step mapped out in his sly, casual voice. He's old. He doesn't even drive anymore. He talks to himself. I found the truck keys in the freezer. He thinks the TV is listening to him. Lies that sound believable when spoken over the phone by a concerned grandson with a clean shirt and worried eyes. And the worst part? He might succeed. Because I was alone. Because I lived simply. Because I had no one left to speak on my behalf. Clara was gone. Edith was gone. I had neighbors, yes, but not the kind who would stand in court. And in this country, when they decide you're too old to manage yourself, they don't ask politely. They take. I stared at the letter again, at that final sentence. I still love you. And felt the bile rise. He didn't love me. He loved what I represented. A dwindling obstacle between him and a deed, a savings account, a vehicle he could flip for cash. And now he was trying to turn my caution into madness, my privacy into pathology. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Clara, about how hard she fought to live, to stay with her son, how she made me promise on her hospice bed that I'd protect him, that I wouldn't let the world swallow him. He's got too much of Brett in him. She whispered once, "Don't let that side win." I didn't understand what she meant then. I thought she was just scared, clouded by the morphine. But now I wondered if she'd seen something I hadn't, an early glint of what he might become. That next morning, I drove into town to speak with Thomas O'Grady, a retired judge who now ran a legal clinic for veterans and the elderly. I didn't want to make it official yet, but I needed to know what my rights were, what I could do if someone tried to declare me incompetent. He listened carefully, took a few notes, and finally said, "You need to be proactive, Mr. Jameson. If you suspect your grandson is maneuvering toward guardianship or power of attorney, you should have your mental faculties independently evaluated by a doctor of your choosing. Establish a baseline. Paper trail matters. If he tries anything, you'll have the evidence to shut it down." I thanked him, and before I left, he handed me a card. "Also," he added, "document everything. Every interaction, every visit, dates, times, conversations. Courts trust records more than they trust memory." That afternoon I made my first log in a yellowed ledger I hadn't touched in years. March 14th. Colby absent since evening of 12th. Letter arrived under door 9:13 a.m. Contains veiled threat of guardianship. No legal document served yet. Truck secured. Locks changed. Documents relocated. 2 days later, just as the snow began to melt off the north-facing roof, the visitor arrived. A dark blue sedan I didn't recognize pulled into the gravel drive around 11 a.m. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, polite expression, clipboard. "Mr. Harold Jameson?" she asked. "Yes. My name's Dana Brewer. I'm with the county's Elder Services Division. Your grandson expressed some concerns about your well-being. I was wondering if we might talk." "Are you here officially?" I asked. "No, sir," she said. "This is a preliminary visit. Just checking in." I stepped aside and let her in, but I kept her in the living room, where every photo and surface told the truth of who I was. We spoke for 40 minutes. She asked about my routines, medications, contacts. I answered clearly, precisely. She took notes. Then she asked gently if I ever forgot where I was or had trouble remembering names. "Only people I don't like," I replied. She smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. Before she left, she said, "I'm not here to accuse or alarm, Mr. Jameson, but if things become overwhelming, there are resources." I nodded. "Thank you. I've been managing this place by myself for 7 years. I'll ask for help when I need it, not when someone else decides I should." She said nothing, just scribbled something quickly and thanked me for the coffee she never drank. That night, I slept with the lights on. Not because I was afraid of violence, but because I knew the next step wouldn't be letters or visits. It would be paperwork, slow and slippery, the kind that takes away your name without you realizing it. And I also knew Colby wasn't done. He'd seen me resist. Now he would push harder, because to a man like him, no isn't a stop sign. It's an obstacle course. The official notice came by certified mail exactly 1 week later. I knew what it was before I even opened the envelope. The weight of it, the stiff paper, the impersonal government insignia in the corner, it all told me what I needed to know. Inside was a formal petition filed in the county court. Colby Jameson, grandson and concerned family member, was requesting temporary guardianship over my financial and personal affairs, citing cognitive decline, suspected early-stage dementia, and potential risk to self and property. Attached were 3 statements, one from Colby himself, one from a Dr. Raymond Lubbock, a name I'd never heard before, and one from an unidentified neighbor who claimed I wandered the property at night in my pajamas, muttering to myself. Lies, all of it, but written in the careful, sanitized language of concern, designed to sway a judge with its soft deception. I sat at the table, holding those papers in my hands, reading them 3 times without blinking, and felt something inside me go cold. Not the cold of fear, but the cold clarity of a man who finally sees the shape of the knife long before it reaches his back. Colby wasn't just testing the water anymore. He was diving in head first, confident that I wouldn't fight, that I would sit quietly in the corner of my own life while he assumed control of everything I had built. That same afternoon, I called Judge O'Grady and asked for a referral to a neurologist. I scheduled a cognitive evaluation, and the doctor ran me through every test: memory recall, language fluency, pattern recognition, emotional reasoning. At the end of the session, she looked at me over her glasses and said, "Mr. Jameson, your cognitive faculties are well within normal range for your age. I see no evidence of impairment that would support a guardianship claim. If anything, you're sharper than most 60-year-olds I know." I had her draft a formal report. Then I did one better. I had a second opinion done 2 days later, and a third the following week, all independently conducted, all signed and notarized. I gathered these into a manila folder that I began calling my armor. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to dismantle his case before it ever saw a courtroom. But I wasn't done. I called the county clerk's office and filed my own affidavit, attaching the 3 evaluations and a signed statement outlining the full history of Colby's recent behavior: unauthorized sale of property, forged documents, financial manipulation, and coercive threats. I attached copies of his handwritten truck appraisal, the letter he slipped under my door, and a log of every suspicious action he'd taken since his arrival. I made sure every page had dates, names, details. I wasn't just fighting for my rights. I was making a record that would outlive the courtroom, something that would tell the truth long after both of us were gone. When the hearing date was set, I didn't tell anyone. I went alone, in my best jacket, with polished boots and clean-shaven cheeks. I walked into that courthouse not as an old man, but as a witness to my own life, prepared to testify against a boy I once carried on my shoulders. Colby was already there, wearing a blue suit that looked borrowed, his hair combed to the side like he was auditioning for sympathy. He barely looked at me when I entered. His lawyer, a young man who probably still had student loans, gave me a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. The judge, a woman in her 50s with the last name Mendoza, read through the files for a long time before she even called us forward. When she did, she asked Colby to speak first. He launched into his story like a well-rehearsed actor. He spoke of his deep concern, of moments of confusion, of my emotional instability and inability to manage personal hygiene. He referred to episodes where I had wandered into town without shoes, which never happened. He cited the incident with the vehicle, twisting it into a story where I had forgotten how to brake and nearly ran into a ditch, which was another outright fabrication. He ended with a solemn voice, saying he loved his grandfather dearly and only wanted what was best. Then he sat down and folded his hands like a Boy Scout who had just earned his badge in deception. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Jameson," she said, "do you have a response?" I opened the folder and handed it to the clerk. "Yes, Your Honor. This is my response. Inside were the evaluations, the statements, the logs, and a personal letter I had written by hand the night before. 7 pages long, every word chosen with care." I watched as the judge read it silently for 10 minutes, her brow furrowing deeper with each page. When she looked up, her face had changed. "Mr. Jameson," she said, "do you wish to make a verbal statement?" I nodded. "Yes, I do. I've lived on my land for over 50 years. I raised my daughter there. I buried my wife there. I have paid my taxes, maintained my property, and made my peace with solitude. I may be old, but I am not absent. I may grieve, but I am not broken. And I may be alone, but I am not lost. What my grandson has done is not out of concern, it is out of ambition. He has mistaken my quiet for weakness. I will not let him rewrite my story just because he's decided it's time to turn the page." The courtroom was silent. The judge looked at Colby. "Do you have anything to add?" His mouth opened, but no words came out. The judge's ruling was swift. The petition was denied. She went further, noting that the evidence suggested potential abuse of process and that the court might pursue further investigation into Colby's actions. I left the courthouse without a word to him. He tried to catch up outside, called after me, "Grandpa, wait!" I didn't stop. He jogged to keep up. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I thought you'd just let it go. I didn't think you'd—" I turned then. "You didn't think I'd fight back?" "That's what you mean. You thought I'd roll over like a dog who forgot how to bite. Well, now you know. I may be old, but I built my life with my hands, and I will tear down anyone who tries to take it from me." He didn't say anything, just stood there in the parking lot, his shoulders slumped, a boy in a man's suit, finally out of plays. I got into my truck and drove home, the sun dipping low behind me, casting long shadows across the road. But inside, I felt taller than I had in years. When I got back to the ranch that evening, the sky had turned the color of dying embers, soft purples and deep rust orange stretching over the empty fields like a quilt stitched by someone long gone. I pulled the Chevy back behind the shed, undid the chains, ran my hand along the hood with a quiet reverence, then parked it beside the house like it belonged there again. No longer a trophy to be stolen, but a sentinel watching over me. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the pines by the barn, and for the first time in what felt like months, I didn't flinch at the sound of footsteps or the possibility of voices outside my door. The house was mine again. Every floorboard, every dented door frame, every nail I drove in with Edith's help decades ago. It was mine, and no one was coming for it anymore. The next morning, I burned Colby's letter. I didn't shred it, didn't throw it away. I took it out back, placed it in the old iron stove I used for smoking fish, and lit a single match. I watched the paper curl, blacken, and vanish into its own deceitful ashes. I didn't feel relief. What I felt was clarity, a hard-earned understanding that some bloodlines don't preserve you. They try to replace you. I didn't hate him. That would have been too easy. I pitied him, the way you pity a thief who's convinced he's entitled to what you've worked for, the way you pity a drowning man who pulls others under instead of learning how to swim. 2 weeks later, I received a short email from Colby's account. No subject line, no greeting, just 2 lines. "I'm leaving Montana. Don't know if I'll be back. Sorry things turned out this way." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I printed it, folded it once, and tucked it into the back of my ledger, the one Judge O'Grady told me to keep. Let it sit there like the final chapter of something that doesn't deserve to be reread. I later heard through the co-op that Colby had tried to sell a classic motorcycle down in Billings, but had no title to prove ownership. Word spreads fast in these parts. No one trusted him. He left town under a rainstorm, and no one waved goodbye. I spent the following months repairing what he'd tried to dismantle, not just the garage or the toolboxes, but the part of me that had, for a brief time, doubted itself. I fixed the rotted porch steps. I resealed the barn roof. I patched up the chicken wire, and even planted onions again in the far corner of the garden. I did it not because I expected anyone to come appreciate it, but because it reminded me that this land still answered to my hands, not his. I called the local high school and offered to mentor in their small engine repair class. Once a week, I drive the truck to the school, pop the hood, and teach kids how to feel the rhythm of a machine without a screen to tell them what's wrong. Some of them ask questions, some just listen. One kid told me he hadn't spoken to his granddad in 5 years. I didn't ask why. I just handed him a socket wrench and said, "Start with the bolts on the left. Tighten until you feel resistance, but don't force it. Let the machine tell you what it wants." Sometimes, late at night, I'll sit behind the wheel of the Chevy and turn the key halfway, just to hear the starter hum, the familiar sound that tells me I still belong in the world. I don't go to town as often now, not because I'm afraid, but because I've already said everything that needed saying with the way I refused to be erased. I have no illusions about time. It's coming for me. My knees creak louder than the front steps. My back stiffens before rain. But my mind, thank God, is still mine. And as long as that's true, I'll live here on my terms, surrounded by the life I built with a woman who understood the value of permanence in a world obsessed with turnover. Edith's photo still sits on the mantel. Some mornings I nod to her like she's waiting to hear how the day will go. I tell her the hens are laying again, that the onions sprouted early, that the boy tried and failed, but I held the line. I don't know if she hears me, but I speak anyway, because some things, like love and dignity, deserve to be spoken aloud even when no one else is left to listen.